Michael Jolley has the most entertaining description, I think. Michael is a bald, bearded builder with a passion for helping others succeed. For nearly 20 years, he's used his experience in software development and DevOps for clients ranging from startups to Fortune 500. When he's not in full geek mode, he's a husband, father of 3, musician, and football fanatic. Michael?
So hello, everybody. My name is Mike Jolley. I am a bald, bearded builder. There's a lot of us in the room. Represent. I have been in software development for about 20 years, doing mainly mobile and web development, but now I'm a developer advocate at Nexmo. Show of hands, anybody heard of Nexmo? Great. So we're doing a great job with that. So today, I'm not talking about Nexmo. Today I'm going to talk about developing inside a container. And just, quick about me. Like I said, I've been developing for about 20 years. I do primarily web and mobile. If I'm not coding, I'm probably spending time with my family, playing some music, or trying to exit Vim. It's a losing battle. But one of the best parts of my job is I get to experiment and find new tooling and processes to improve the development experience. And that's what I want to talk to you about today is thinking inside the box and developing inside of Docker containers. Now, how many have heard of Docker and containers? Hopefully, a lot of us, yeah. So they're great. More and more companies are moving in that direction. They're going to microservices and distributed applications, and they're using containers to do it a lot of times. There's a lot of interest in the resiliency and the scalability that containers provide. And then after organizations felt comfortable with their apps running in containers, they kind of moved that thing up the pipeline of DevOps to testing and doing some QA and that kind of stuff in containers. And it worked out great, so it only makes sense to kind of keep it going up the pipeline. So that's what we're going to talk about, is moving containers up the DevOps pipeline to actual developing inside the container. And we don't want to do that just for the sake of doing it. We want to do it because it solves a pain point for us. So first, let's talk about some pain points. One of the first phrases that you learn as a developer, it's a hidden rule, I guess, or whatever. It's a secret handshake. Is it works on my machine. You're kind of not allowed to run a build until you learn that phrase. But unfortunately, when I tell that to a customer, they don't seem to care. So it's ops fault. Yeah, so the problem is we need an environment to develop in that mimics production as closely as possible so that when we tell the customer it works in my machine or tell whoever, it should actually work in production because they're the same. Onboarding is another spot that needs improvement. Has anybody joined up with a team of developers and you spend hours or days just getting things set up before you even see a line of code? Yeah, it's that's what it's like. Yeah, sorry for the animation. No charge for it. So one of the problems is you come in, you bring this new team member in, and you say, hey, this is great. You need to install, VS Code. Okay, great. You need to install this library and that SDK. And hey, we do a lot with Google Cloud. You need to install the Google Cloud CLI. And you need to install that and all that. And the developer spends, a day installing all this tooling. And they sit there and they've got their IDE up. And they're like, okay, here I go. Let me run it and just see if I can play with it. They hit build, it runs. They bring it up in their browser or whatever. And it throws an error because somebody forgot to tell them about that environment setting you have to have. Or that SDK, that something API key that they didn't have. So now they've got to go track down all those things. And hopefully there's only one because odds are they're going to say, oh yeah, that environment variable, that's been there for a year. You need to set that. They'll go back and build it. They'll come back with another error and they'll say, oh, you need the whatever API key. Here it is. It's going to take you forever. So we want people to speed up. The last pain point is security. So when you're installing all those third-party toolings, you're just opening your machine up for attack vectors, right? So if you've ever installed SQL Server and even Developer Edition and exposed it to the web, I dare you to do it. And I dare you to watch your log, because immediately you will see SA login failed, SA login failed, SA login. I mean, within seconds. It's insane. Then you may install, say, the Python SDK. Well, the Splunk Python SDK had an exploit last year. Maybe you're not into that kind of crazy Python stuff. You want to stick with Facebook. That's easy. Okay, well, the Facebook SDK had an exploit last year. So you get the point. All these are attack vectors on your machine. And frankly, hashtag, I don't want it on my machine. That doesn't go into the fact of conflicting SDKs, right? So you have client A, who their whole application and stack uses Python 2. And then I've got client B who uses all their stacks on Python 3. And then I go to the command line and type in, Py. Well, who answered? Which one of those SDKs just replied? The same goes with every, .NET. If I want to run .NET build on something, was it 1.0? Was it 2? Was it 2.1, 2.2? Lord help you how many Angular CLIs you can accumulate over the course of a year when they release them every 3 months. So you're saying, we get it. How do we get out of this? Hurry it along. We can combine the power of Docker and the power of VS Code with a new extension called remote development. So remote development is an extension that allows you to build inside of a container, build over SSH, or build on WSL. We're just going to talk about containers because they're more fun. So what does that allow you to do? I'm glad you asked. First, it allows us to define the development environment in the Docker file. So if you're familiar with Docker, you're familiar with Dockerfile, right? You can't really do one without the others, So the Docker file, we can define what that environment looks like. So your developer can be in Windows, they can be on a Mac, they can be in Linux, doesn't matter. The Docker file defines what the development environment is. Then we also, in that Docker file, can stage up environment variables, stage up API keys, so that when they spin up that container to work, all those things are just there. They probably don't even know they exist. They're just set up for them. And they go away when the container goes away. It also means that developers can simply install VS Code, Docker, and that extension and be up and running in minutes. No third-party tooling necessary. Things like SDKs and CLIs, we can have those pre-installed inside the container in the image, so that when the person spins up that project, they're working in their operating system on the host machine in Visual Studio Code. To them, it's a seamless experience. They don't see that there's a container in the back end with all the code. So when they go in there, they can go to the terminal, they can run commands against the Google Cloud CLI or whatever else, and it just works, even though they haven't installed it. And let me say, when I first talk about developing in containers, people land in like 3 phases of belief or disbelief, right? So you'll have to identify which one of these you're in, but basically people start off sometimes in the "wah" phase. That's the phase where you say, what are you talking about? The pressure of no hair has crushed your brain and you're having problems. You also have people in the second bucket of, like that's interesting. Tell me a little bit more, because you've got my interest. And then the third bucket is the people who are just gung-ho. They're the ooh phase. It's a new toy. Let me install it today. Where's the link? Just skip to the end. So hopefully by the process of this whole talk, we move everybody to that ooh phase, and you want to go try it out with your people when you get home and test them like test subjects. So with that, let's do some demos. Is that okay? I asked facetiously, we're going to do demos. Okay, we're just going to open up code. And before I start, I'm just going to show you, all I've got installed here is a couple of extensions. Enabled is just a pretty theme, remote containers extension, and Docker, just because I like to look at it. And there's nothing fancy about this code. It's just, you can see package.json. This is just a little node script, index.json. And then I've got this .dev container. So when we set up Visual Studio Code, we can open a folder in a container it sets up this Docker file, and it sets up the dev container JSON. Docker file is exactly what you think. It's just setting up a container for us. In this case, I just said, set me up a basic Node 8 container, nothing fancy to it. But then that dev container.json actually allows me to do some extra fun goodness to it. So it just tells it, you're gonna load this Docker file from there. There's some settings like app port, settings for the Visual Studio Code, post create command. So that's a command that says, once this container is spun up, execute this command. So down here in the bottom right, I'm gonna say reopen this folder in a container. And it's gonna think about it a little bit. Okay, so then I've got, you see down the bottom, hopefully you can see that down there. It says dev container Node.js 8. So it's running that container, that's what I called it, was Node.js 8. And so all this code now is inside that container, and you can kind of notice it says it up here next to the folder name. And if I bring up the terminal, of course I'm running in Windows. Well, let me open up a new little terminal here. Go ahead and open that, go ahead and open that. You'll notice that my terminal down here is bash because this is a Linux container running with Node.js in it. And one of the things I did was in this post create command, I said install the Google Cloud SDK. Now I don't have the Google Cloud installed on my machine. If I actually go out to PowerShell and do gcloud, auth login maybe, it's going to say what the what? I don't know what that is. But in my container, if I were to, say, run some kind of gcloud command, if I just do that one, functions, yeah, that's right, deploy. It's going to give me, I need more parameters, but you can see it's installed there. Not necessarily on my machine, but inside the container. So a few things in this, a few things that the dev container JSON allows us to do. First is specify app ports. So if we're running, let's say, a web app in this container, we're building a web app, we want to eventually be able to test it on our host machine. So this allows us to specify, as you're building up this container, just know that I want you to map port X to port X on my host machine. That way, if I'm running on port 3000, I can just go hit localhost 3000 and see the web page and test it locally. The next section is settings, and settings are related to VS Codes. Has anybody ever used VS Code before? Hopefully, yeah, it's pretty cool. So it's based in Electron, so a lot of the stuff is CSS based, and you can actually set a lot of the colors or stylings or just functionality of the editor based on these settings. So in this case, I've got a workbench theme of quiet light if I uncommented that, but you can specify all kinds of stuff like that. You can specify, hey, the default terminal should be bash or ZSH, whatever. You can do all kinds of settings there. Post create, we talked about that. It allows us to execute scripts inside the container once it's installed. And then extensions. This is a great one. So you can see here, one of the extensions I have loaded in my container is this ESLint extension. And if I come over to extensions, I can see installed locally, which is those 3 that I had. And then in the container, I've got ESLint installed. I didn't have that on my local machine. But just in the context of this project, I have that extension, which works great if I'm doing, say, a C# project. If you're doing that in VS Code, you're more than likely going to want the C# extension for Visual Studio Code. Well, you don't have to install that anymore. You can just set in here. I forget the actual name of it, but just say MS VS Code, or excuse me, what is it, C# or something? So whatever it is, when it loads up this when this loads this project, it'll load that extension for me. So I'll have the .NET builds and all the warm, gooey feeling of that extension. If you want to troll your friends and put an ugly theme in there, that's possible too. Troll's gonna troll. And then some run arguments. So if you want some arguments set when the container spins up, like you want to use a different user than the admin user, all that kind of stuff, that run arguments allows you to do that. A lot of functionality there. Close that. No, don't save that. So we're running in the container, and there's nothing really special about this little JavaScript. So basically, it just takes in a library from Nexmo and gets some environment variables that are already set in there, or should be set. Hopefully they are. Takes a constant from, a message, and basically this is just a little webhook. It's set up like a Google Cloud function, and it's just going to be used as a webhook. So it's going to receive a request and do something. In this case, it's actually going to receive a webhook from an SMS message and send an SMS back with a reply. And we're not going to dare try to remember this Google Cloud command. We're going to copy and paste like an animal. Okay. So Google Cloud, the SDK is only running inside of my container. It's not running on my local machine, but I can execute that, and it should tell me that it's going to try and deploy it. Yep, deploying function may take a while, up to 2 minutes. So we got 2 minutes. Anybody got anything you want to discuss? Or? No, it doesn't really take that long. So one of the things I want to point out here, can I zoom in on this? Zoom way in. One of the things I'm going to point out while that's still deploying is that phone number there. You can send an SMS to that phone number today, and it will send you a SMS back with all the slides, all the source code, all the related links about the talk today. So it's kind of cool. A little interactive. Okay, so that came back fine. I'm going to see if I can do that. Demo gods, be appeased by my presentation problems. I'm just going to text T. And hopefully, if I had my volume turned up, you'd have heard that. You heard the little iPhone sound. Can't see it? Oh, the number's off the screen. There you go. It's for security's sake. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, you'll get that text. There's the message it's actually sending there. And it'll be in a later slide too, you can see that. So that's got that one going. And we just deployed this using Google Cloud. Like I said, we don't have Google Cloud installed on our local machine, and it just worked. That demo. Let me start up another one. So this is a different project, and I'm going to reopen this in a container. And this dev container is a little different. It's still a Node 8 container, but you'll notice like on the post create command there, I don't load the Google Cloud SDK. Don't need it. This app just has a little Node.js Express web page, nothing fancy. Bin bash, I'm telling it, hey, use this as the default terminal. And go ahead and expose port 3000. I'm going to be using port 3000, so go ahead and have it ready for me. And that's all it has in it. And then we can go over to our script. Again, this is just basically a Node.js. Nothing fancy to it. It's going to serve up on port 3000 and should just give us that message. Here I've got a breakpoint set, so I'm going to go debug. And then let's go to a browser. You can see down there at the bottom, app listening on port 3000, so it's ready to go. And let me find, what is it, localhost 3000. And my code is flashing down there because I hit a breakpoint. So the code is all running inside this little Linux container, but I can hit it and break on it anytime I want to. Same works with, this is Node, but C#, anything, Python, doesn't matter what code, we have that capability. So hit continue there and come back over. Hello, DevOps Days Chattanooga. Don't forget to text that number for slide source and more. So just like that, we can debug there. One of the cool things, and I don't have a demo of this, but I just want to kind of process-wise, DevOps may be wise, is really slick. So we know we can debug in containers, we can build, and what's great is we can use a container, that container that we have, that Docker file, can be used as a base build for production. So we can take that container, that image that gets built from that Docker file, and use it as the base for builds to go out to the field, which is amazing. So it really is, you're developing in a container very much like production. But one of the things I wanted to talk about on the post create command there, it's commented out, and that's where we installed the gcloud. So this is a scenario we've been setting up and playing with it at the office, and it's really kind of cool. So if you have many repos, does anybody use Git? Okay, so you have multiple repos, right? And all these different projects, you got to open that one, you got to open this one, all that kind of stuff going on, which means, git clone here, git clone there, git clone, everybody gets a git clone. The problem with that, you can do that, that works, it's the way we do it. But imagine, if you will, a repo that only has folders. No code in it, it's just folders that represent each of our projects. So we have 10 projects, right? Repo 1 through 10. We have a folder, a repo that just has 10 folders with repo 1 through 10. Inside of those folders are just these dev container JSONs and Docker files. So we pull down a repo pull down that one repo, and then we open up repo 1's folder in VS Code and say, open this in a container, because it'll recognize it and ask us if we want to. We can set up a post create command, because it's a Node.js in this case, but we can have Git installed inside the container. We can have in that post create command, hey, when this container gets created, do a git clone of the actual project's repo. And then we could even set up and say, hey, go ahead when they're starting their day and create a branch. Don't let them work off master. Let them work off some development branch for the day. And then they can commit and push their code from the container. So the source code never really lives on their machine. At the end of the day, they'll close down code and the container will kind of go away. It'll still live there, so they can, if they forget to push, they can open it back up and commit and push again, assuming they don't like Docker prune or something like that to delete all their containers. But it allows them to just pull the one repo and always just open the folder you want, so that it's one easy place. So it's kind of a cool little feature. We haven't seen anybody use that in the wild yet, but we're kind of playing with it because it's kind of fun. And dev's gonna dev. Let's see. No, dadgummit, no. I worked hard on these slides. We're gonna see the animation. Darn it, worked too hard. You don't lose all this hair goofing off. Yeah, that's right. So hopefully you can see how this process can really accelerate your team while improving your software and security. You can find my slides and the code you saw today and examples and some other resource links to learn more at that link or by texting that number. You can find me on the Twitter at Michael Jolley. And I live stream coding on Twitch 3 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, Sunday, whatever day, at 2 Eastern. So I'd love to have you there as we kind of learn and do this kind of stuff every week. And then if you have any questions or input, I'd love to talk to you. You can ask questions. I don't know how much time we have left. I didn't even look. I guess I should have paid attention to that. 2 minutes. Oh, that's perfect. One question. You better make it a good one.
Any questions over here? Yeah. Do we have one?
I don't understand the post create command example, but maybe just an example.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just build everything you needed into your Docker file, particularly if something you wanted to operationalize later?
Certainly could. So In the case of this example,
Did everyone catch the question? Sorry.
Yeah,
He's asking why not just have it part of the Docker file? Why have the post create command at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason it's done in this example is because when you open up a folder for the first time in a container, that dev container folder doesn't exist. So VS Code will say, well, what kind of container you want? And it has a ton, I mean, probably 30 different options. Every Python version, every Java version, Ruby, anything you can think of, right? So in this case, I chose Node 8, and of course that doesn't include that Google Cloud. So, well, I guess two reasons. One is that, and the second is, if I didn't put it in the post create, I couldn't show you today. It would just be in the container. But yeah, absolutely. If you want that to just be a part of the container, that's certainly something you could do. You know, certainly environment variables. It's just showing the capability. And sometimes you may not want that in if you're really using that container as a basis for later builds, you may not want that CLI in that container. Because more than likely you're not going to deploy it that way. You're going to deploy an image, and you may not want that image necessarily in that. And hopefully you're just going to copy out the compiled code to something else, but yeah, it's an option.
All right. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Give Michael a hand.